I was just waiting for those horns. Should be coming soon, right? What you feeling down for? No, I like that. I like that. Just vibing right now. Don't be sad. Open your eyes. The sun is shining. The angels are dancing in heaven. You hear me?
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Better days are coming by and by. We can make it if we try. Come on. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Look around and then I see a little old man and a homeless lady. They don't have no food to eat. Father, give them a warm place to sleep. Come on, wake up the people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up the people, wake up. Wake up, people, wake up now. Storms will come and storms will go. The earth may quake and still the souls of the ones we love, and some will die.
Some shall
But
die.
they're in heaven, so dry your eyes.
Dry your eyes.
Celebrate life,
Don't you cry.
jump for joy,
Jump for joy.
like a baby with a toy.
Little baby.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Dry your eyes.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up now.
Don't you cry.
Wake up the people, wake up. Wake up. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up. Wake up now. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up now.
Wake up. So, if you are listening now, you are a honorary member of this book club. The book show is every Sunday, 4 till 6. And here we will read books on history, culture, spirituality, psychology, economics, and in fact we will read books on every area of human behavior. I'd like to say before we start, this show is sponsored by Glass R Us. You will find Glass R Us at 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15 5NH. You sell any glass repairs, double glazing repairs, shelves, tabletops, splashbacks, mirrors, shower cubicles, any of your glass needs. Glass R Us, 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15 5NH. You can get them on 0208 800 6663. Again, glass are us. You can get them on 0208 800 6663. Okay, so I hope you've been listening these past few weeks. Today we're going to continue what we've been doing on the past few weeks. We'll still be talking about religion and spirituality. So our main book we're going to be using today is a book by Charles, or doctor, is a medical doctor, Charles F. Finch III, MD. And the book is called Echoes of the Dark Land, Themes from the African Eden. So we're going to be starting with chapter 5, and chapter 5 is entitled The Nile Valley Sources of the Old Testament. So I'm sure you've been listening this past few weeks. We spoke a bit about the Old Testament, a bit about the New Testament, quite a bit about just general religion generally, because all nations have had religions. We only think sometimes only 1, 2 or 3. Every nation has religions. But today, Nile Valley Sources of the Old Testament. So, let me just remind you first of all that serial number. So please, when I go through these readings, please text in, phone in, 07944 431 366. Again, the studio number 07944 431 366. So please text in, phone in anytime you like. If you like what you hear, any comments, please call in. So, this is chapter 5 of the book Echoes of the Dark Land by Dr. Charles Finch III. So it goes. In our previous chapters, we have attempted to lay the foundation using the Massian method of natural genesis for discussing religious themes that came to dominate the history of the Western world. In our approach, we have attempted to show the extent to which myth and religion interpenetrate. So myth is, after all, a symbolic, typological means of representing the psychic, cultural, natural dimensions of reality. So through myth, archaic humanity sought to make tangible the impalpable, to create order from chaos, to give form to the inocate, and to make the cosmos intelligible in terms of the common experience of humanity. So myth was then, as is now, the only truth that man could grasp, because in its pristine forms it is achieved for him by a synthesis of reality. Today the dross man is mistaken for the real gold, and the dross of myth and fables, fairy tales and superstition. The debasement of the coinage of myth refused to look beyond the surface structure of myth, seeing only the empirical eye instead of the intuition of which true myth speaks to. Joseph Campbell, in his book, has called myths depersonalized dreams, and dreams personalize myths. And in this, he is undoubtedly correct. But myths are not merely epiphenomena of psychic activity. Its substrates feed directly into the psyche from concrete external sources organized. So let's say that there is no religion without myth. In fact, no organized system, such as Marxism, can express itself in mythic form and images to wit. The sacred symbols of the hammer and sickle, the revealed scripture of Das Kapital, or the worship of the dead sacred kings, Lenin and Stalin, lying in state in the Red Square. So the withering away of the state is merely the Marxist version of utopia, paradise or nirvana. Even in an anti-mythic age, mythic impulses inform everything that we do. So take myth out of religion, and there is no religion. Gerald Massey, in 36 years of mind-bending labour, was able to demonstrate that revealed Judeo-Christian religion, as preserved in the Old and New Testaments, presents but the creation of history out of purely mythic events, figures and episodes in scripture meant to be allegorical expressions of an age-old mystery drama were gradually transmogrified into real persons and events. The unbelievable and fantastic in the Bible are precisely those elements that were originally mythical, then made historical. Revealed religion is but unrevealed mythology. In examining the Bible myths, we have no intention of debunking them as mere fictions, but of tracing them back to their original condition. We wish to dehumanize, euphemerize them, and that is chip away at the incrustations of the bogus history so that they can be understood in their original essence. That accomplished, it will become clear and evident that both testaments are fundamentally Afro-Kemetic at their root. So Kemetic is really the ancient Egypt. So African ancient Egypt at their root. This is not to deny the kernel of historical fact, but present in many Bible stories, but these facts are so fused with myths that it is almost impossible to disentangle them. Once the proper keys are applied, however, it is possible to unveil a new biblical revelation, one that explains the source and substance of Judeo-Christian belief. Beneath the surface narrative, the Bible is a vast subterranean pool of mythic actuality, which in truth extends its reach. Tapping into the reservoir, the Bible assumes a place in the living stream of Afro-Kemetic wisdom, whose beginnings are as old as Homo sapiens himself. Kemetic wisdom is Kepra-like, ever becoming, and the Bible participates in continuing sequence of revelations. However, literalistic bibliolators can teach us nothing of this, and nothing they have to say will serve us here. To approach the Bible in its geo-ethnic context, we must begin to critically examine the term Semitic, which is conveniently and all too loosely employed to describe the peoples and cultures of Western Asia and Arabian Peninsula. The term is derived from the name of the legendary eponymous ancestor of these people, identified as Shem in the semantic history. In the genealogy of Noah. In modern usage, however, the word has a checkered semantic history. The connotations that arise from it depend on the point to be proved or worldview to be reinforced. Variously, the term of Semitic is regularly invoked whenever antiquarians wish to code the intent behind this approach. It is a way of saying that civilization was created by a Caucasian race, one that can readily succumb to this facile, more or less approximate of the Caucasian type, and it is easy to suppose that this has always been the case. As we shall see, though, the case was very different in antiquity. It is important to clarify the Semitic question, because there is a persistent tendency to view the rise of civilizations in Africa as issuing from Semitic, and when they say Semitic, read Caucasian, stimulus. Largely, this is based on the perceived affinities between the languages of the civilized people of the northeastern Africa and the Semitic languages of Western Asia. For scholars of the Semitic school, this was proof enough that the Caucasian invaders from Western Asia stimulated the development of such civilizations as Africa produced. In the definitive monograph, Process of Semitization, Sheikh Anta Diop has shown us that, far from being a branch of the Caucasian family as ordinarily assumed, the Semitic type only begins to emerge at the end of the proto-historical period, between around 500 BC to 4000 BC. As a result of gradually inbreeding with the indigenous blacks of Western Asia and with migrating European types, these blacks belonged to the Natufian culture, whose remains covering most of Western Asia date back to 10,000 BC. Their cranial remains show them to have possessed an obvious African affinities. From what we know about the early migrations of Africans out of the continent to populate the rest of the old world, there is nothing strange in this aboriginal presence in Western Asia. Western Asia is, after all, geographically adjacent to Africa, and therefore a logical conduit through which Africans could emigrate. The first cultures of Western Asia, especially those in the Fertile Crescent, arose out of the aboriginal black Natufians. In Sumer, so often touted the world's first civilization, the African derivation of the original inhabitants is betrayed by the name for them, which actually means the blackheads. This is what the people of Sumer call themselves, the blackheads or the black face, and by skeletal remains which show an extreme African type. Furthermore, Sumer's capital was Kish, the same as the Egyptian Kesh, a name for Kush or Ethiopia. The idea of a close ethno-cultural connection between Kush and Sumer was first put forward by Sir Henry Rawlinson, a prominent 19th century Orientalist. Particularly in the realm of language, Rawlinson found that Kushite and Sumerian betrayed unmistakable affinities. More recently, a direct line of evidence has appeared in the work of Walter Fairservice, wherein he links the language of Sumer to that of the pre-Aryan Black Dravidians who created the Indus Valley civilization. Since we know that the creators of Indus Valley culture originated in Africa and passed through the northeast corridor into Western Asia on a migration that brought them to northwest India, the links between their language and Sumerian strongly suggest an umbilical African connection. Sumer would have been a way station, so to speak, on this migration, settled and cultivated and ultimately transformed into one of the world's early, or not first, civic societies. Northeast Sumer was the land of Elam, whose capital was Susa. the first pre-Aryan civilized state of Persia. About the race of the Elam, or the Elamites, there has not been the slightest doubt since 1894, when Dufalloy discovered the Acropolis of Susa, whose walls displayed numerous reliefs depicting highly civilized, unmistakably black-skinned, woolly-haired populace. This caused confusion among later Greek chroniclers. They couldn't decide whether the black Ethiopian King Memnon, the nephew of Priam, who fought at Troy, came from Cush or Elam. On the Horn of Africa and in the adjacent southwest corner of Arabia, of the Arabian Peninsula, the black Sabaeans created a brilliant Cyclopean culture famous for its marvelous architecture and his astronomical knowledge. The name of his country was Saba. Is exactly the same as the Egyptian word meaning star. This is a reference to the Sabaean reputation for stargazing. Saba, the biblical Sheba, is mentioned in the records of at least one Egyptian expedition to the African lands to the south. That the Sabaeans were blacks is attested to in Genesis, as we will see below, and in the writings of Josephus. The biblical testimony to the early black presence in Western Asia is found in the genealogy of Noah. Though allegorical or legendary, the genealogy faithfully records ethnic classifications known to the Old Testament writers. For our purposes, we can focus on the lineage of Ham, one of the three sons of Noah, to appreciate the relevant relationship. Our name Ham comes from the Hebrew for Cam, which is in turn is derived from the Egyptian word Cam, which means black. That Ham is the eponymous ancestor of black African people is so universally accepted as to require no further demonstration. Thus, the Old Testament writers, assuredly eyewitnesses, knew intrinsically that the ancient Egyptians, Cushites, Punites, and Canaanites all belonged to the same black African family. This is additional confirmation that Canaan, as well as other parts of Western Asia, was originally inhabited by Nafutians, or the Nafutian blacks, who remained the dominant ethnic type there down to the end of the proto-historical period. We see, moreover, that the Sabaeans were Cushites, which conforms to the above-cited testimony of Josephus. Another important son of Cush in the genealogy diagram is Nimrod, the mighty hunter, best known as the legendary founder of Babylonia. Thus, our earlier assertion that Mesopotamia culture was originally Cushite finds tangible support from the Old Testament. The biblical writers, in delineating these ethno-historical relationships, were drawing upon more than just hearsay and legend. The Hebrews, after all, spent 70 years in Babylon, and since many of them rose to positions of influence, it is not too much to assume that they enjoyed access to Babylonian records in the same manner as Berossus, who was a priest there. We are therefore drawn inexorably to the conclusion, following Diop's argument, that the Semitic world and civilization arose on a foundation laid down by the black indigenous people of that region. The business of the Egyptian and Ethiopian languages being Semitic now begins to come into proper focus. In 1920, E.A. Wallace Budge proposed that Egyptian was fundamentally an African language. This opinion was ignored until 1975, when Sheikh Anta Diop and his talented colleague, the Congolese scholar Théophile Obenga, demolished once and for all the notion that the ancient Egyptians was anything else but African, or it was anything else but an African language, at the now famous Cairo Symposium. At this gathering of some of the leading Egyptologists in the world, Diop and Obenga showed that the lexicon, syntax and grammar, Egyptian was in all aspects an African language, allied to tongues as diverse as Wolof and Bantu. But how could Egyptian be an African language and yet retain so many Semitic characters or characteristics? The noted linguist Joseph Greenberg has provided an answer. He discarded the imprecise and illogical such familiar Greenberg's opinion. This category was justified by the demonstrable affinities between Semitic Hebrew, Arabic, Phoenician, Aramaic and Amharic on the one hand, and the Northeast African group comprising of Egyptian, Cushite and Chadic and Hausa on the other hand. What this means is in effect is that the so-called Semitic languages are but branches of the original Northeast African parent, of which Egyptian and Cushite are charter members. This interpretation is consistent with Rawlinson's 19th century assertion that the Chaldean languages were offshoots of Cushite. Moreover, the Semitic characteristics of Amharic, which is an Ethiopian language, would have evolved from Sabaean, from its Sabaean antecedents, according to Diop, and not from the language presumed Semitic invaders. We can sum up by saying that the African languages in Greenberg's Afro-Asiatic group were primary and Semitic languages derivative. Many, if not most, linguists have accepted Greenberg's model or variations of it, but we must now consider an important dissent. In a private conversation, the prominent Congolese linguist Théophile Obenga categorically rejected the Afro-Asiatic linguistic classification of Greenberg, insisted that the Northwest African language family, formerly Hamitic, and the Western Asian one, formerly Semitic, are separate and distinct. But Professor Obenga readily agrees that numerous proper names and other loanwords pass from the Northeast African language group into the Western Asia group. At a later period, 1250 to 600 BC, loanwords and names would have passed back into at least the Egyptian branch of the Northeast African group. This bilateral passage of words and names between the adjacent linguistic families accounts for the similarities between them in Obenga's view. The argument is far from settled, but as shall be seen, either approach can be adduced to support the thesis and method that will be developed later in this chapter. The first Semites in history were in every way mulattoes, that is to say what we might call today mixed race. All that we have said up to now points irrefutably to this conclusion. Moreover, for 2,000 to 3,000 years at least, up to 680 BC, the African states of the Lower Nile Valley, exerted a kind of hegemony over the large sections of Western Asia. The Bible itself offers eloquent testimony to the impact of both Egypt and Cush on the histories of Palestine, amounting to basically a ruler over, sovereignty over, in the case of Egypt, for the better part of 500 years. Knowing this allows us to register, develop and clarify the powerful currents of the Afro-Kemetic symbolism and mythos that pulsate through the Bible. It becomes evident that the Bible is essentially a Kemetic document, and we have tried to set that stage for a definitive proof of its provenance by reference to ethnography, linguistics and anthropology. But the idea that Africa is the prime source, at least of the Pentateuch, that is the 5 books of Moses, will not go down easily, not even with the empiricists who refuse to accept it as the revealed word of God. No matter what our conscious attitude towards the Bible may be, we have been conditioned to look anywhere but to Africa for its origins. The Hebrew story begins around 2000 to 1900 BCE. That means before the Christian era, BCE. When the shepherd Abram migrates from his father's land in Chaldea through southwest Canaan into the land of Egypt during the pre-Hebrew stage of history. Hebrewism as a religion and a way of life is predicated on having received and followed the law given to the children of Israel by Moses at foot of Mount Sinai, which did not occur until 700 years before Abraham left Chaldea. Thus, we can't call Abraham or Abraham a Hebrew, and in the point of fact, he is a legendary founder of an entire branch of Western Semites. The Arabs, for example, claim descent from Abraham through Ishmael, the son of Hagar, an Egyptian woman, and Ishmael, Abraham's first son. Through his second son Isaac, Abraham is the progenitor of the Edomites, through Esau and the Hebrews, through Jacob, Israel. The mixed or mulatto character of at least the Ishmaelic branch of Abraham's descendants is obvious, since the Egyptian origin of Hagar makes her a black woman. Moreover, Ishmael's wife is also an Egyptian, so Ishmael's children have to be 75% black ancestry. Their descendants go on to become the Arabs of history. Here, Ishmael and Isaac are species of the warring twins whose prototypes are Set and Horus. Just as Set, the elder twin, is superseded by Horus, the younger twin, so Ishmael, the older, is superseded by Isaac, the younger. This theme permeates the Pentateuch. In addition to Ishmael and Isaac, there are Cain and Abel, Esau and Jacob, Ephraim and Manasseh. In each instant, twins are poised against each other or one another, and the younger twin gains ascendancy. J.G. Fraser calls this ultra monogeniture, contrasted by earlier primogeniture. It is indicative of the new epoch in which the younger brother, representing the patriarchate, is made to assume the birthright of the older brother, whose legitimacy derives from the mother. To better grasp the historical genesis of the Hebrew nation, we must examine one of the most enigmatic epochs of Egyptian history, the period of the Hyksos domination. The Hyksos furnish a point of departure for the modern inquirer searching for a way around the legendary and miraculous events of Exodus. Though this is far from certain, they seemed to have achieved dominance in Egypt sometime between 800 BC and 1700 BC. Manetho had this to say about them. This is about the Hyksos. So Manetho, who was an ancient Egyptian priest, says, there was a king of ours whose name was Timaeus. Under him it came to pass, I know not how, that God was adverse to us, and there came a surprising manner of men of ignoble birth out of the eastern parts, and had boldness enough to make an expedition into our land, and with ease subdued by force, without any hesitating, a battle on them. So what really Manetho is saying, that the people from Western Asia attacked Egypt and took control of Egypt without even having a battle. So obviously there was people inside of Egypt who worked with the outsiders to take over Egypt. It has been assumed as a matter of course that the Hyksos were Asiatic invaders from outside of Egypt territory. But the one Egyptian authority who has access to the archives informed us that the only usurpers were of ignoble birth and came from the eastern parts. Nowhere does he say that they were Asiatics or came out of Asia. The Hyksos era is obscure and problematic because contemporary records were ruthlessly sponged by later generations of Egyptian rulers. What does survive leaves very little impression of foreign rule. In fact, Egyptian culture and political organization apparently flourished without interference. Later conquerors such as the Assyrians, Persians, Macedonians left distinct traces of their rule over Egyptian body politic, but marks of the Hyksos are barely recognizable. The one thing that does change is that Set, the oldest of the Egyptian religion made deities, is re-elevated to supreme status. What evidence we have concerning that period, including the Testament of Manetho, attests to this. This development makes us believe that the eastern parts to which Manetho refers might more plausibly be constructed or construed to have been Egyptians' eastern deserts, home to more plausibly the home of a group of nomads and shepherds, derived from the Egyptian hik, meaning either king or captive. In Sa and Su, Hellenized shepherds, this gives Hikasa and Hikaset, which when Hellenized, put into Greek language, is Hyksos. This is called the Hyksos, are the people who invaded Egypt, and means either shepherd kings or captive shepherds. We may well presume that the pastoral people inhabiting Egypt's eastern desert were in effect Egyptian nationals, or at the time, at least, dependents who pursued their way of life as part of the Egyptian protectorate. They would have been constant sources of trouble and turbulence to a settled civilization like Egypt, and Set, the god par excellence of the desert and desert people, they would have been a constant source of trouble, and there would have been and Set would have been their supreme deity. There is nothing strange in assuming that during the period of social and political instability in the second intermediate period, certain desert chieftains could have formed a coalition and seized power in Egypt and imposed the worship of Set over the most of the country. This usurpation came from within Egypt's national territory rather than from outside, given further credence by Manifold's assertion that political power was seized in what amounted to a bloodless coup without hazard or battle, as he put it, being in effect Egyptian nationals. These eastern nomads, the Hyksos, would have changed nothing essential to Egyptian life except to reassert the supremacy of an older Egyptian deity called Set over the reigning supremacy of Amen Osiris. So let me just remind you that if you would like to call in, the studio number is 07944 431 366. That is 07944 431 366. The worship of Set, known as Setek in Canaan, was still very pervasive in parts of Egypt and Kush. So dominant was Set worship in Canaan at the time of the Hyksos established their rule or their capital in Avarish, which is in the northern part of Egypt, in the delta. Closer to their co-religionists, Upper Egypt was completely dominated by Amen, and the Hyksos were never able to bring this part of Egypt entirely under their control. Under Hyksos domination, Set or Sektet worshippers from neighbouring Canaan could find a ready haven in Lower Egypt and filtered into the delta in a number of ways. So the Hyksos period makes its presence there improbable. There would have been no bar to the talented person of Canaanite extraction rising in the service of the Hyksos people. So be that as it may, this occurred in the reign of Zoser, or the first relates to an episode that occurred in the reign of Zoser of the 3rd dynasty. Excuse me, just taking a quick drink. The first relates to an episode which occurred in the reign of Zoser in the 3rd dynasty. There was a period, so the annals tell us, when Egypt experienced 7 consecutive low Nile floods, leading to 7 years of famine. Finally, Zoser turned to his great prime minister and the most trusted advisor Imhotep, who, after consulting the sacred books, advised Pharaoh to repair to the temple of Khnum, the controller of the floodwaters in Nubia. Khnum appeared to Zoser in a dream, describing all that needed to be done to release the Nile floodwaters and relieve the famine. Duly following Khnum, the famine to the end. In the story of the two brothers from Egyptian brothers Anubis, that catches the amorous eye of the brother's wife. He goes to her husband to accuse Bata of improper advances. A catastrophic series of events befall Bata, evoking the episode of Joseph's encounter with Potiphar's wife. It seems likely that these two episodes in Egyptian literature served as a source of material for Joseph. Story of Harold Crooks points out that Joseph, after all, was in all things Egyptian and very likely an initiate into the Egyptian priesthood. We will therefore not be overextending ourselves to say that the story of Joseph is but the worked Egyptian folk material. The clan of Jacob is very likely worshipped Atu or Yui. So Ra, both Ra and Set, the ass that pulls the bark of the sun god Ra across the heavens, or alternatively, that carries Ra between his god. He is one of the 75 totems. As we have seen, he is also a symbol of the sun. So we're going to take a quick break here now, and then we'll do a bit more. Don't forget that the studio number is 07944 431 366.
Mama Africa, Mama Africa, I'm coming home, I'm coming home. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I'm feeling fine, and I hope you're fine too. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I hope when you hear these words, your grace turn blue, grace turn blue. I'm saying these words to let you know how much I care, and I won't let go. Even though we're oceans away, you're with me day by day. Memories of you keep flashing through my mind. The very thought of you make my time. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I'm feeling fine, and I hope you're fine too. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I hope when you hear these words, your grace turn blue, grace turn blue. Don't you worry now, I won't be long. Sweet paradise, I'm coming soon. When I'm with you, I can't be wrong. If not in May, then you'll see me in June. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I'm feeling fine, and I hope you're fine too. Hello, Mama Africa, how are The sweetest things are there to be found. The golden sunshine, the wind that blows around. The fresh vegetation which comes from the earth. Oh, Mama Africa, you make me know what life is worth. Hey, hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I'm feeling fine, and I hope you're fine too. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I hope when you hear these words, your grace turn blue.
Time is getting harder and harder, more and more each day. Yeah. Still I am determined that I'm never gonna change my way. Thinking about love the way it should be. You got a hope in your eyes and you will see about love the way it should be. You gotta make up your mind and you'll advance humanity. Humanity. Oh, what happened to the love that they are all talking about? It's nothing but useless words coming from out of their mouths, talking about love the way it should be. We got a hope in our eyes and we will see about love the way it should be. We gotta make up our minds and we'll advance humanity. Humanity. What happened to the love that they are all talking about? There's nothing but useless words that are coming from out of their mouth, talking about love the way it should be. Open our eyes and we will see about love the way it should be. We gotta make up our minds and we'll advance humanity. Whoa. Listen, people, listen. You got the notion. Listen while I'm saying to you. You got the notion. A little bit of justice and peace. You got the notion. We'll bring a little love for everyone. You got the notion. That you got the notion. You got the notion. You got the notion. Oh, get in the motion. Get in the motion. You got the notion. You got the notion. You got the notion. You got the notion. Get in the motion.
Yes, greetings, family. This is the Afrocentricity Book Show. Welcome back after our short break. I'd just like to say that I've got a couple of shout outs here. So please remember that there is a quiz night happening on Saturday, the 20th of October 2018, which starts at 7 p.m. till 10:30 p.m. This is the Our Legacy Black History Month quiz night, and it's fundraising for Afrocentricity International. So if you'd like a ticket, it's a teams of 6. So if you'd like a ticket, please phone 07931 787860. Yes, this is the Our Legacy Black History Month quiz night, Saturday the 20th of October, 7:30 till 7 o'clock till 10:30 in the evening. Yeah, it's £10 a ticket for teams of six, raising money for Afrocentricity International. So come along to this fun-filled night, test your knowledge of black music, sport, history, and things like that. So it's really a great night. It's raising money for a good cause. So ensure that you come. I'd also like to say that there is a new book out, a new children's book out, and the book is called Knowing About Marcus Garvey of the UNIA. You can get a copy from. You can either go to the website, which is called Knowing About, and it's at marifaonline.com. So Marifa is spelled MAARIFA. So Knowing About at marifaonline.com. You can also get the book at the Mama At Centre in Tottenham High Road. So the book is called Knowing About Marcus Messiah Garvey and the UNIA. It's a children's book. It's richly coloured, beautiful illustrations, and you can get a copy by going to Knowing About at marifaonline.com. And remember, Marifa is spelled MAARIFA online.com. Okay. Just to remind you that this show is sponsored by Glass R Us. Glass R Us is 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15 5NH. Phone number 0208 800 6663. That's 0208 800 6663. Please go to Glass R Us for any glass repairs, double glazing repairs, shelves, tabletops, splashbacks, mirrors. For any of your glass needs, please go to Glass R Us. So we are going to continue our reading. We're going to talk about a little bit about Christianity now. So I'm reading presently from the book Echoes of the Dark of the Old Darkland. Hold on one moment. So this chapter is called Osiris, Egyptian Funerary Ritual and the Birth of Christianity. So having explored the Afro-Kemetic sources of the Old Testament, we may now elucidate that the Afro-Kemetic roots of the Christian religion. Christian apologists have expended an enormous energy creating the impression that Christianity sprang up suddenly and miraculously as a new order ordained by Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The good news of the gospel is considered the latest and last dispensation of the Almighty. Christian roots of the Old Testament are readily acknowledged, but Christianity is seen to hold pride of place as the highest and holiest dispensation. Little is seen to hold pride of place, or literally God's last words. Christianity took from ancestral Judaism all that was needed in it, rejected the rest, and then turned on its progenitor in a fury of anathema and repression. Frequently in history, the followers of the older religion, though giving birth to the new one, are branded with a demonic and unholy aspect by the new devotees. Such was the fate of the followers of the Setian religion vis-a-vis the worship of Osiris and Amen. Similarly, the followers of the Hebrew religion, founded at Mount Sinai, cursed and abjured pharaonic Egypt, out of which their religion actually emerged. Egypt came to epitomize evil and godlessness. Thus, Christianity's hostility to Egypt came to epitomize, or hostility to its parental Judaic religion had ample historical precedence. Given the prestige of Greek culture in late antiquity, it is not surprising that Greek philosophy, particularly that of Plato, also exerted formative the formative influence on a nascent his Christianity. That of Plato also exerting a formative influence on from the Roman Empire. It became the chief means by which the writers or the written dogma of Christianity was promulgated. In the Western Church, a significant amount remained in the liturgy even after Latin became the sacred language of Christianity. And in the Eastern Church, Greek remains the sacred language to this day. There is a yet third route for Christianity, all but acknowledged or all but unacknowledged for the present, and it is the Afro-Chromatic. So much basic Afro-Chromatic material poses in the Old Testament that certain of these ideas would have crept into Christianity indirectly. Other Platonic ideas derived from Afro-Chromatic metaphysics, notably that of the Logos, that is the idea that it is a divine thought or divine mind who created the world, also drifted into Christianity. But we are not concerned here with the oblique infusions of such thought into Christian dogma, but with our own direct, tangible, unintentuated and borrowing. As a matter of history, that the early church ignored its precursor elsewhere in the Mediterranean world, found nurturing haven in Egypt. The early desert fathers such as the Black Saint Anthony, countless like him in Egypt, were the first to hammer Christian doctrine into distinct shape. The Christian hermits were the founders of Christian monasteryism. The church's early saints and bishops were Egyptian. In fact, the tradition of African sainthood would assert a formative influence on European Christianity. One of Europe's earliest martyrs was Maurice, a black captain of the Theban Legion of the Roman army stationed in Central Europe. He accepted death rather than execute a Christian, becoming the patron saint of Switzerland and Germany. The capital of Christendom up to the time of Constantine was Alexandria. His bishops were instrumental in creating an organizational structure of the patristic church. Moreover, the Egyptians were among the first as a people to accept Christianity. Egypt was securely Christian before Greece or Rome. These Camite people of late antiquity took so readily and so naturally to the new doctrine because they perceived it to be an unbroken continuation of their old religion. Early Christian teachings contained nothing alien to Egyptians. Christianity was Egyptian in their eyes. The Christ myth, instead of being a spontaneous upsurge of a new religious divine dispensation, was traced back to masses some 10,000 years in Africa. That historical Christianity is largely a reworking of Afro-Chromatic Africa. That historical Christianity or religion ideas that has come as a profound shock But once we look beneath the shrouds of heresy which has been cast over the early canonical elements, we can see the validity of this conclusion that will become self-evident. So we cannot untangle the threads that lead out of the matrix of old African symbols into modern Christianity. The energetic reader desiring a more comprehensive picture is referred to the boundless massy material. We must focus on the Osirian myth, which forms a bridge between Christianity and the pre-extant Kamite or Kemetic symbols. One exploration of the Osirian drama will allow us to unravel the phenomenal origins of Christianhood. Plutarch will aid us immeasurably in this task because he is the only coherent narrative of the Osirian story that we possess. Plutarch was perhaps a Greco-Roman world's most reliable authority. His primary source material undoubtedly was the writing of Manetho, the Egyptian historian who lived around the Ptolemaic period, which is the Greek rulers' period. The authenticity of Plutarch's version of the Osiris myth is almost conspicuously corroborated by Egyptian monumental inscriptions. It must be said, however, that Plutarch was a Greek of the philosophic type, and he may have understood, or he may not have understood, the substructure of the phenomenal typology underneath the Egyptian myth. He was more at home with the metaphysical explanations, fashionable among the Neoplatonist philosophers, but his cogent rendering of the Osirian myth stands alone. Even surviving Egyptian literature lacks such a narrative. As we saw in an earlier chapter, the Egyptian name Osiris or Asar or Wasar means begotten of Isis, making him the son of Isis and thus a type of sun consort. This means that Horus and Osiris are aspects of the one another. Classical mythographers echoed traditions that revealed that the mother-son relationship between Isis and Osiris. So Lactanus tells us the priests with their shaven heads, shaven bodies, beat their breasts and lamented, imitating the sorrowful search of Isis for her lost son Osiris, and how afterwards their sorrow was turned to joy when the jackal-headed god Anubis, or other mama on his head, on his steed, produced a small boy, the living representation of God, who was lost and was now found. Osiris was a son of the principle of growing vegetation, either as grain or a tree. This vegetation Osiris, and thus this vegetative Osiris is sometimes depicted in green color. Plutarch tells us Osiris is buried when the sown corn is hidden by earth and comes to life and shows himself again when it becomes the sprout. We see that Plutarch has preserved the old agrarian typology, originally dominated by the Great Mother. Osiris, in his vegetative aspect, sacrifices himself as a harvested grain for which bread is made, to be eaten and as a real food for regeneration. His rebirth occurs in the new sprouts of the succeeding spring. As we have already noted, certain traditions assert that Osiris was killed by a scorpion, and this refers to the harvest that occurs at the sign of Scorpio. We can reaffirm there that the earliest type of savior was originally a she, who gave himself as food so that the community might live. In Plutarch's narrative, a tree grows up around the coffin of Osiris when it lands in Byblos, the country of reeds. This is another manifestation of the growth or regrowth principle. The dead god is reborn as a tree, a kind of symbolism, legion among the ancients that explains the custom of many cultures of burying the dead in the hollows or branches of trees. This was effectively the sign language. This was effectively the sign language of resurrection, and the tree is later stylized as a cross, as in the symbol of the Tet or Jed, whose raising signified the re-arising Osiris. Osiris was also the god of grape, cultivation and winemaking. This was one reason among many that the Greeks had considered him the prototype of their own Dionysus. As we have seen, the intoxicating properties of wine gave a mysterious and sacred role in certain rites, for the imbibing of wine enabled the priests to assimilate with the ancestral spirits and their forces of nature. Plutarch informs us that the kings used to drink it, though in certain measure, according to the sacred writings, Hectius has narrated, for they were priests as well. Since Osiris, the great ancestor, was identified with the grape, wine, the blood and the spirit of the grape is his blood and the spirit as well. In priestly ritual, to drink wine was to drink the blood of Osiris. The lives of Egyptian kings were divine or divine enactments of the life of Osiris, whose blood was rendered symbolic by wine. Osiris was also prominent as a lunar deity, presiding over the moon's 28-day or 29.5 days cycle. According to Plutarch, Osiris ruled for 28 years before spreading civilization to the rest of the world. And 8 and 20 is the number of years which some say Osiris lived, and others that he reigned for this. He reigned for this is the light of the moon, and it rolls out of its own circle in that number of days. The sun censorship of Osiris to Isis is also played out in this lunar drama. By thus placing the power of Osiris in the moon, they mean that Isis consorts with him, while being at the same time the cause of his birth. With rare exceptions, modern mythographers have failed to recognize Osiris-Isis mother-son relationship, though there are intimations of it in Egyptian rituals, and Plutarch categorically declares it. Earlier we noted that Set, the dark side of the moon, cuts Osiris' body into 14 pieces, as Plutarch explains. The rearing of Osiris into 14 pieces, they refer enigmatically to the days of which the luminary wanes after the full moon up to the new moon. Thus the war of the twins is incorporated into lunar mythology, but there is a linkage between agrarianism and lunar typology. The sacred king submitted himself to death and dismemberment in an act of fertility and regeneration. The dismembered moon is regenerated as a new moon. Thus, the dismemberment of the moon and that of the sacred king are functionally the same. No matter what the imagery employed, it was the death and resurrection of Osiris that accounts for this unique position in Egyptian religion for 4,000 years. But the resurrectional drama steadily evolved. First, it was Isis, his mother-sister wife, who revived and reconstituted the dead Osiris, and Isis as a maternal type of resurrecting as a resurrecting agent, found in both the Egyptian ritual and Plutarch's narrative. She is the one who gathers all the parts of Osiris' dismembered body, knits them together, refashions the missing phallus, and then fans the breath of life into the inert body. After reviving him, she begets the child, Horus, from the resurrected Osiris, in a significant twist on the old theme. Isis is fertilized by Osiris, the sacred king, after she has resurrected him, but his phallus is in effect still belonging to her. It is Isis who refabricates the lost member of Osiris and impregnates herself with it. But we find that in the last phase of this evolving story, Osiris' son Horus assumes the role as resurrector, the one who calls Osiris forth from death. Anubis, the primeval guide of souls, now asserts Horus in his role as embalmer and reconstitutor of the dead. But all worshippers could hope for resurrection after death. As noticed, Isis is the second principle of the Osirian drama, whose rites of resurrection devolve from her own. Her name in Egypt means Ast, which means seat, abode, or throne. It also means womb, or tomb, or chapel. And thus the etymology of her name makes Isis both the womb and the tomb of Osiris. In dynastic times, she became the supreme goddess of the pantheon, embodying all the positive feminine attributes of a deity. She is the latest and perhaps the sublimest form of the Kemetic Great Mother, as gestator, bearer, nurturer, and protector. She is the virgin mother of Horus, recalling the ancient mother who conceived and brought forth alone. The son of this primal mother is represented as imperfect, as lame or blind, in contrast to the perfected Horus, the son of Isis and Osiris. In his manifestations as a son of the mother alone, he is Heru Pa Khat, Horus the lame. Plutarch says of him, Harpocrates is brought forth about the winter solstice, imperfect and infant in the things that sprout too early. In the Osirian drama, Isis is the true and faithful consort, who with her sister Nephthys mourns the dead Osiris and searches tirelessly for his dead and dismembered body. She is the feminine counterpart of Osiris, as an aspect of the grain and other growing things. Originally in the feminine domain, she presides over making of beer, the oldest of the fermented beverages. Her zootype is the great cow, identifying her with Hathor, and thus also makes her a type of the full or pregnant moon. In addition, she is noted as the star Sirius, the herald of the flood, the annual Nile inundation, as said to originate from her teardrops. She is Remi, the weeper, which she also alludes to in her sorrows in the wake of the murder of Osiris. And finally, she is the Queen of Heaven in the form of Nut. The third divine actor in the Osirian drama is Heru, or Horus, whose Egyptian name is derived from the root Her, which means face. Heru is the face of heaven, and thus originally a sky god. He has a rather protean parentage. In one aspect, he is the son consort of Hathor, whose Egyptian name, Heteru, means mansion of Horus. In another, he is styled the son of Ra, making him a type of rising sun. As the face of heaven, his right eye is said to be the sun and his left eye the moon. In lunar guise, he is Khonsu. He is best known, of course, as the son of Isis and Osiris, the highest type of divine child. And finally, he is the twin, and ultimately the antagonist of Set. As the younger twin, he overthrows and supersedes Set, which in celestial typology represents light triumphing over dark. Horus is therefore the emergent sun, who in rising slays the Setian or typhonic dragon of darkness. Horus is the prototype of all later heroes of mythology, who one way or another are depicted as slaying the dragon in its multifarious guises. Horus, the Egyptian name Heru, is likely the source of the Greek word hero. His most important zootype is that of the soaring ability, or my apologies, his most important zootype is the golden hawk, also a type of Ra, whose golden colour, keen eyesight and soaring ability made it the ready solar zootype. As a bird of prey, often feeding on snakes, the golden hawk was a symbol also of the martial Horus in his warring capacity against Set, the Set dragon or serpent. In the Taurian age, Horus is the bull Mentu of Thebes, who was also the martial aspect. Most fundamentally, however, Horus is the resurrected Osiris, who has triumphed over death. We have already dealt with at some length with Set, the fourth divinity of the Osirian cycle. To reiterate, he is the oldest male deity, the first son of the mother, and the embodiment of the earth, the tall solar fire, the pole star, Sirius the storm, thunder and desert. He is at various times black Set, the golden Set and the red Set, this last in his evil person. He is at first a benevolent and powerful deity who, under the impact of Osiris or the Osirian ascendancy, turned into the great adversary. In this he is similar to Lucifer, the first and greatest of the god angels, who rebels and is cast out of heaven. In fact, the name Lucifer means light bringer, analogous to the solar aspect of Set. The Greek counterpart of Lucifer and also of Set is Prometheus, who stole the sacred tree of Olympus and brought it down to men. We should mention that even though Egyptologists do not usually connect Set to the solar fire, that last impeachable of the witnesses, Plutarch, confirms this relationship. So Plutarch says, some of the mathematic doctrines derived from the solar law, from the star law, think that solar cosmos is called Typhon, and the lunar Osiris, that the moon in that light is generative and moistening, is favorable both for the breeding of animals and the sprouting of plants, whereas the sun, with his untempered and harsh fire, burns and withers up that which is growing, and with fiery heat renders the major part of the earth entirely uninhabitable. So whatever his manifestation developed a reputation at the close of Egyptian history as inimical, that red and gold, two colors associated with him, because taboo are certain rituals. All these zoo types took on a negative character to varying degrees. In the Osirian drama, he is preeminently the evil one who murders his good and kingly brother Osiris and threatens the life of the infant son Osiris, of the infant son of Osiris, Horus. He is the protector of Satan. Reviewing the attributes of the principal characters of the Osirian drama, certain parallels with the Christian gospel immediately stand out. The composite figure of Osiris Horus is the archetype of the gospel Christ. Like Jesus, Osiris Horus was born of a virgin, contended against the adversary in the desert, died, and was resurrected to become the judge of the dead. Isis, like Mary, was a queen of heaven, the virgin mother of the divine child. Set was the original Satan. One of the zoo types was a goat, complete with horns, tail, and cloven hooves. Moreover, Set's color was red. But the links between Osirian mythic structure and Christian gospel, or gospel Christianity, are much more closer than these superficial, though striking similarities. The nativity itself is an Egyptian import. In the temple of Amun in Luxor, first built around 1700 BC, there is a panel of 4 pictures depicting the birth of the infant Pharaoh, who is a god king and was the avatar of Horus on earth. In the 18th dynasty, the pharaohs more fully assert their divine prerogatives, insisted on their descent from Amun-Ra through their mortal mothers. The birth of a pharaoh, therefore, was divine, a divine nativity, one of which was portrayed on the walls of the Amon temples at Luxor more than 1500 years before Gabriel in Matthew's Gospel announces to the royal mother the impending birth of a divine child, who as a son of Amun-Ra will reign as a divine king over Egypt. The royal Mary, as the mother of the one to come, who will be the king of Israel. In the second scene at Luxor, the royal mother stands before Hathor, the mistress of childbirth, while Neph, the personification of the divine breath, holds an ankh, the symbol of life, to the mouth of Mut and Wa. Neph, as the divine breath, is veritably the Egyptian Holy Spirit, and by holding the ankh to the mouth of the royal mother, he signifies that he is conceiving by the power of the Holy Spirit. This is echoed by Matthew's Gospel, where Mary also conceives by the power of the Holy Spirit. In the third scene, Mutemwa is sitting on the birthing chair. Adjacent to her sits a newly born royal babe, shown as a child Horus, holding his finger to his mouth. This is the Egyptian version of the divine child, who in Matthew is born in Bethlehem. In the final scene at Luxor, the heavenly hosts of the Egyptian pantheon gather around the newborn child to pay homage to him. In front of the child stands three divine personages, proffering gifts. In Luke's Gospel, the heavenly host of angels gathered around Christ. To pay homage. We see the three kings, or magi, come before him offering precious gifts. Hence, in these mural scenes from the temple of Amun, or Ammon, we have 1700 years beforehand all of the essential elements of the gospel nativity: the Annunciation, the conception, birth, and adoration of the child. The only difference is the Palestinian as opposed to the Nile Valley setting. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus is referred to as the light of the world and the sun to shine on those who sit in darkness. In point of fact, the Gospel Jesus assumes the attributes of the solar gods of antiquity, of whom Horus was the prototype. In his solar form, Horus was Heru, Neb Ikau, meaning Horus, the light of the world, or Horus, the Lord of light. In every way comparable, Jesus is the light of the world. That Jesus was a solar type derived from Horus is seen in the canonical birthday on the 25th of December. That is the birthday of Horus and all other solar gods of antiquity, such as the Persian Mithra, whose story closely parallels that of Jesus. As we have seen from Plutarch, Harpocrates, that is Horus the child, is brought forth around the time of the winter solstice. Now, in the late antiquity, the sun reached its apparent nadir, that is the lowest point, at the winter solstice, on or about December the 22nd. It appeared to remain stationary in this position for about 3 days, and then just after midnight on December the 25th, the sun began its ascent on the ecliptic, reaching its zenith at the summer solstice on June the 22nd. The beginning of the sun's ascent on December the 25th was metaphorically its birth, and since its ascent began in the deepest hour of darkness on the morning of the 25th of December, the sun was said to be born of a cave, just as a certain extra gospel traditions place the birth of Jesus in a cave. As Ernest Bussenbach informs us, according to the Alexandrian astronomers, Songenes, who revised the calendar for Julius Caesar around 46 BC, the winter solstice took place on December the 25th at 1:30 a.m. It was reckoned the nativity was due to the sun because the day when it begins to lengthen. Because the day then begins to lengthen. In the pre-Christian era, the constellation of Virgo, the celestial virgin, was positioned due east on the horizon as the sun started on December 25th its annual ecliptic ascent. Thus, we can see that the sun was born of a virgin in a cave on the 25th of December. We are further informed by Bussenbach that high in the western sky on December the 25th stood the sign of Taurus, and that within the sign of Taurus there is also a small group of stars called the stable of Auragius. This is the same stable of Aegeus, which Hercules mythologically cleansed as a sixth labor, and Justin Martyr proudly boasted that Christ was born on the very day when the sun takes his birth in the stable of Aegeus, in the sign of the goat. The Gospel places the birth of Jesus likewise in a manger. The Church Fathers consciously assimilated the old solar deities to Jesus by changing his original birth date to January the 6th, an old Roman festival, to December the 25th instead. The Roman Church converted January the 6th to the Epiphany, when the three wise men, or Magi, was said to have visited Christ child. Such were the tactics of the very early Christian proselyters, co-opt the worshippers of the older gods, especially the solar type, by Christianizing pagan customs and feast days. That the Epiphany is also astronomical is alluded to in the Gospel of Matthew, which describes a star in the east, guiding the three men to the manger of the Christ child. According to Edward Carpenter, this star was none other than Sirius, which, as he relates, stood on the southern meridian, and in more southerly lands than ours, this would be more nearly overhead, and the star, there is little doubt, is the star in the east mentioned in the Gospel. To the light, as it's supposed to observers looks, at Sirius on the midnight at Christmas Eve, stands the magnificent Orion, the mighty hunter. There are three stars in his belt, which lie in a straight line pointing at Sirius. The long tradition gives them the name the Three Kings. At a time far anterior to the advent of Christianity, the year of Egypt was reckoned to begin with the summer solstice, coinciding with the rise of the Nile flood, and the heliacal, that means the sun, the heliacal rising of Sirius. This made Sirius the herald of the flood and the new year, and since Osiris was often represented as fertilizing the Nile, Sirius, in his heliacal rising, was also the herald of Osiris. So we're coming up to 4 o'clock now, so I'm going to be winding up very shortly. So now Sirius, the dog star, was also set Anubis, the earliest type of guide by night of the heavens, was in Amenta. And Amenta is what the ancient Egypt they call heaven. The three kings followed the star in the east, are the three stars on the Orion belt, following Sirius or Set Nubis, the heavenly guide and herald of the sun. The stellar three kings, which derive from Orion's belt, are also related to Osiris because the Egyptian name for Orion is Sahu, the spiritual and resurrected body of Osiris. The Nativity, as its astronomical antecedents show, is as much a rebirth as it is of new birth. Consequently, the whole is ensemble of meanings attached to Sirius as a star in the east that serves as a heavenly guide. In its celestial phase, the entire chromatic mythos was originally a stellar before coming incorporated into the solar mythos and manifestating in Christianity. So from the summer solstice, the new year was retroverted 6 months to the winter solstice, becoming the new birth date of Osiris Horus on the solar mode. Thus the Afro-chromatic mythos was natural first, celestial second, and in three phases, and resurrectional last. All features to this evolution are detectable in Christianity. So I'm going to be wind up now because it's 4 o'clock now. So again, over this past few weeks, I think you've seen that the religion we know as Christianity is a very, very ancient religion. We can see that there was a crucified Saviour who resurrected himself after 3 days. We can see that there's a virgin birth and a son who takes the role of the Father. We can see that there's a baptism. We can see that there's annunciation. We can see there's a whole nativity play. So what we need to understand is the Council of Nicaea. The Council of Nicaea was called by the Emperor Constantine. And Constantine got many bishops together to finally decide on what Christianity would be. And it was at the Nicene Conference at 325 AD that this whole religion we now know today as Christianity was put together by the bishops under the auspices of the Emperor Constantine. There was no such religion called Christianity before the Nicene Conference. And the whole myth of Christianity we can see is actually lived out in the stars, because the ancient people were the first stargazers. So the whole sun rising after a rest of 3 days happens at the winter solstice, and when the sun does rise, it's in the star sign of Virgo, the Virgin, who is on the horizon. And rising as well at the same time is the sun Sirius, which is rising in the east of the sky, which turns out to be the star in the east. And also rising is Orion the Hunter, the star constellation. And on the constellation of Orion, he's got a belt, and in the belt is 3 stars. The 3 stars have a name, which is the 3 kings. And the 3 kings are in a straight line aiming at Sirius. So this whole religion we know as Christianity is actually from the stars, from the sun, and really from a kind of astronomical observation is where this religion came from. But at the Nicene Conference, and this is historical, so you can check this out. At the Nicene Conference, this mythos was happening in the sky was made flesh in the auspices of what we call now Jesus Christ. And Constantine the Emperor, he said he had a dream, and he saw the cross, and he said, I must conquer by this, saying that he believed that he had to conquer by using the cross or using the religion. So it was created Christianity, and for Christianity to live after the 325 AD Conference of Nicaea, the Roman emperors closed down the ancient Egyptian temples, because the ancient Egyptian temples told the truth of what Christianity actually was. It wasn't flesh, it was allegory, and it was symbolism, and it was mythology. But it was through Christianity that this symbolism, mythology, was made into flesh in what we call Jesus the Christ. And the Roman Emperor uses new religion to conquer the world, because when you use a religion, you can actually conquer people's minds with religion. And this is really what the mythos is about, really. They used it not really for the redemption of humanity. It was more really the Romans used it to control humanity by using this religion to conquer people's minds. And we've seen over the past few weeks that there's history to this, because nobody didn't know anything about Jesus until about 300 years after his alleged birth. There were historians in the 100 years after Jesus, in 200 years after Jesus, but none of these historians mentioned any Jesus, which suggests that there was no Jesus around for the historians to mention Jesus. But in the 4th century, 325 BC, this is when we start to hear about this Jesus, after it was created at the Nicene Conference. The whole purpose of this Afrocentricity book show is to tell the truth. This may, what I'm saying, upset some people, but we have to deal with truth if we're going to move forward. We cannot move forward dealing with fantasies and illusions and fairy tales. We have to tell the truth. Because when we tell the truth, I think as this divine book says, the truth will set us free. And we have to be set free so we can move forward as a people. Because sadly, we have been lied to more than anybody else in more recent history. So when the truth rears its head, we have to deal with truth, because we cannot deal with illusions and fantasies and lies. So this has been the Afrocentricity book show. We're here every Sunday between 4 and 6. Please send your messages in if you'd like to cover certain topics, certain subjects, so we can deal with them. This show is sponsored by Glass Are Us, 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15 5NH. You can get Glass Are Us on 0208 800 6663. Again, Glass Are Us, you can get them on 0208 800 6663. Go to Glass Are Us for any of your glazing needs. Any glass repairs, whether it's putty glass, double glazing, if you want shelves, tabletops made, splashbacks, mirrors, shower cubicles, balcony glasses and balustrades, please go to Glass Are Us in 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15 5NH. You can get him on 0208 800 6663. Also, don't forget our Legacy Arena Quiz Night. Please phone 07931 787860. That is 07931 787860. The quiz night is happening on the 20th, Saturday, the 20th of October, 2018. 7 till 10 o'clock. Teams of 6 is £10 a member. Teams of 6 is a great quiz night, and we are raising money for Afrocentricity International. So this has been the Afrocentricity book show. Remember, every Sunday, ensure you tune in 4 to 6 o'clock.
You gonna cue me, or you gonna tell me when to divide going on? Or you just gonna set it up? I was just waiting for those horns. Should be coming soon, right? What you feeling down for? No, I like that. Just vibing right now. Don't be sad. Open your eyes. The sun is shining. Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake
Listen.
up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Better days are coming by and by. We can make it if we try. Come on. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Look around and then I see a little old man and a homeless lady. They don't have no food to eat. Father, give them a warm place to sleep. Come on, wake up the people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up the people, wake up. Wake up, wake up, people, wake up now. Storms will come and storms will go. The earth may quake and still the souls of the ones we love, and some will die.
Some shall
But
die.
they're in heaven, so dry your eyes.
Dry your eyes.
Celebrate life.
Don't you cry.
Jump for joy.
Jump for joy.
Like a baby with a toy.
Little baby.
Wake up, people. Wake up.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people. Wake up now.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people. Wake up.
Dry your eyes.
Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up now.
Don't you cry.
Wake up the people. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up. Wake up now. Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up now.
Wake up.
The storms will come and the storms will go. The earth may quake. Still the souls of the ones we love. Yes, some will die. Yes, some will die. But they're in heaven. So dry your eyes. Dry your eyes. Dry your eyes. Don't you cry. Don't you cry. Dry your eyes. Wake up. It's gonna be alright. Dance in the streets. It's gonna be alright. Dance wherever. It's gonna be alright. You may be. It's gonna be okay. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. I know. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. I know. Wake up. Wake up. Well, yes, I know. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. Good God Almighty. It's gonna be alright. Put your hands in the air. Wave them like you just don't care. Oh, Lord, Lord. Father God, in your name I pray. Help my people. Help my people. Help my people, Lord. Help my people, Lord. Oh, no, no. I know. It hurts sometimes. Yes, I know. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. We're gonna jump for joy. We're gonna be alright. A little shout. Yeah, a little shout. Y'all know how y'all do in church, right? You just shout. Jump for joy. Put your hands in the air, just like that. Put your hands up in the air like that. I feel alright. You like that? I like that too. Let us wave. Woo. Just wave. Now turn around to your neighbor. That's right. Turn around. Look him in the eye. Say it's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright, y'all say. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. A little louder. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. That's alright, Josh. It's gonna be alright. Now I'm gonna one more time. One more time. You ready? Let me hear you just like this. Say it right. Wake up. Wake up. What? Wake up now. Wake up now. Y'all sing it. Wake up. Wake up now. Wake up. Wake up now. One more time. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up now. Wake up now. All right, let's go, y'all. My father would love this. See me sing a church song, a spiritual song. You know what I normally do. Yeah, I'm a preacher son. You know when you rock with Josh Milan, it's just gonna happen. Hallelujah. Good God Almighty. I feel it in my hands, feel it in my feet, feel it in my soul, all over me. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. I know what you're going through. I know where you've been. It hurts sometimes. Lord knows. Keep your head up. Keep your head up to the sky. Dry your eyes. Dry your eyes. It's alright. It's okay. Remember, the sun will shine in the morning. God bless. Wake up.